To the WordPress series. In this lesson, we will learn how to create a dynamically generated About the Author box. Let's begin by jumping into a demo of the finished product that we will be building together. Alright, so this is the home page for our website, but if I navigate to a single blog post detail screen, if I scroll down to the bottom of the post, here we can see the About the Author box. So this pulls in an avatar for the user as well as their name, also a bit of biography text, 3 of their other most recent posts, and then a button to view all posts by that author. Now I must admit, if your website only has one author, then this feature won't seem very cool, because you could just hard code all of this content in your theme files. But if your website has multiple authors, I think this is pretty neat. So check this out. If we go back to the home page, and click on one of these blog posts. So I will click on Eating Grass is Nice. Now we see that the About the Author box is for Kitty Doe. Here's her biography text, and here's a link to her only other blog post. So you get the idea. The About the Author box pulls in info about the author of the current post you're viewing. Now behind the scenes, I just reset my theme files to the state they were in at the very end of our previous lesson, so you and I are now on the same page. At this point, let's begin working together to add back in the dynamic About the Author box. So let's jump over to our text editors, and within our theme folder, let's open up content-single.php. Let's scroll down to the bottom of the file, and right below this the content line, let's add a few new lines, and let's create a new div. Let's give it a class of About Author. Within this new div, we are going to want 2 columns, one column for the avatar and one column for the text content. So let's create a subdiv with a class of About Author Image. And let's create another div with a class of About Author Text. And within this About Author Text div, let's add a heading level 3, which will read About the Author. Let's go ahead and save this file and refresh in the browser. So here's the new HTML that we just added. Let's go ahead and style it a bit with CSS. So back in our text editor, let's jump into style.css. Let's scroll down to the very bottom of this CSS file, and let's create a new comment to stay organized. Let's say About the Author section. First, let's select the entire About the Author box and give it a background color. So it had a class of About Author. Let's give it a really light gray background. So background color, #, and then ed. Let's also give it a bit of padding. So padding 20 pixels in all 4 directions. Let's see how that looks. That looks a bit better. Next, let's add the 2-column layout. So let's create a new rule that targets the About Author Image div. So this will be the first column. Let's float it to the left and give it a width of 28%. And let's also set up the second column, the text column. So it had a class of About Author Text. Let's float it to the right and give it a width of 68%. Now if we were floating both children divs of the parent div, we want to make sure that the parent div clears the floats. So back in our HTML, or I should say our PHP file, let's give this main About Author div a second class of clearfix. So now if we check things out in the browser, we see the beginnings of a 2-column layout. Alright, that's enough CSS for now. Let's change gears and begin writing PHP to actually output the current author's image and their text content. But before we do that, let's first talk about user accounts in WordPress. So if we jump to the admin dashboard and click on users in the sidebar, we can see that my example site only has 2 users, in this case 2 authors, but obviously on your WordPress site you can create as many users as you'd like. So if you want to let your friends, family, or coworkers create posts, you just create a new user account for them based on their email address. But back to the task at hand, we want to see where we are pulling author information from. So for example, if I click on Kitty Doe, this nickname field is the name that we will want to display on the front end. And if I scroll down, here we see the biography text that we will want to echo out. And here's the user avatar we want to display. Now you don't actually upload your avatar directly in WordPress. Instead, you need to create an account on a website named Gravatar, which stands for Globally Recognized Avatar. And then WordPress will look up your user account avatar by searching the Gravatar service for your matching email address. I definitely recommend taking a couple of minutes to set up a Gravatar account. It's definitely worth it. It isn't just for your own WordPress site. Also, if you leave a comment on any other blog on the web with your email address, it will automatically pull in your avatar. Also, GitHub, Stack Overflow, and Discuss can also pull in your photo based on your email. But let's get back on track. So now that we know where author information is being pulled from, let's jump back into our theme files and write PHP to finish our About the Author box. So within our content single PHP file, let's begin by outputting the Gravatar image within our About Author image div. So within this div, let's drop into PHP. And we want to echo out the contents of a function that WordPress offers us named getAvatar. We will provide this function with two arguments. The first is the ID for the user or author that we want to look up. So to find the ID of the author of the current post, we can use a function named getTheAuthorMeta, and we are interested in the ID. So that's the first argument that we will pass the getAvatar function. But let's add a comma here because we will also provide it a second argument where we specify the size of the image that we want it to return. So we could say 100 pixels or 200 pixels, but let's go with the max value of 512 so the image will be as sharp as possible. And now if we save this and check out the browser, here's our Gravatar. Now I think it would look nice if we overlaid the WordPress user account name on top of the very bottom of the photo here. So back in our PHP, underneath this image line, let's create a paragraph, and within it, let's drop into PHP, and let's echo out the contents of getTheAuthorMeta, and we are interested in their nickname. So if I save that, we see that it outputs their nickname of Kitty Doe. So now let's just use CSS to position this so that it sits on top of the bottom of the image. So in our text editor, let's jump into style.css. And beneath this rule for the image div, let's create a new rule that selects the paragraph element within that div. So about author image P. Let's tell it to be positioned absolutely, and it should sit at the very bottom edge. And let's also tell it to be full width, so left 0, right 0. Let's also give it a transparent black background, so background color, RGBA, 000 gives us black, and let's say that it should be partially transparent. Let's go with 0.5. Let's give it a bit of vertical padding, so padding maybe 4 pixels vertically, and we don't need any horizontal padding. Let's tell the text itself to be aligned in the center, so text align center. Let's also make the text bold, so font weight bold. And why don't we give the text a subtle shadow, so text shadow. Let's go with 1 pixel offset and 1 pixel blur, RGBA to create black, and then let's tell it to be 85% visible. Let's say that the text itself should be white, so it's easy to read on the black background. And let's also zero out any margins that this paragraph element would have, so margin 0. And finally, if we are telling this element to be positioned absolutely, we want to be sure that we tell its parent element to use position relative. So that way our name paragraph will be positioned in relation to its parent instead of the entire page. So let's see what this looks like. That looks pretty good. But if you zoom in really closely, you can see that there's maybe a 3 pixel gap where the paragraph is positioned lower than the image. Now if we want that to align perfectly, we just need to tell the image to be a block level element. So within our CSS, let's create a selector that targets the actual IMG image element and just say display block. Now let me zoom in really closely, and when I refresh, we see that the bottom edge is now perfectly aligned. All right, so that takes care of our image. Next, let's work on outputting the biography text for the author. So in our text editor, let's jump back into contentsingle.php. And within this about the author text div, underneath our heading level 3, let's drop into PHP. And let's echo out the result of get the author meta. And we are interested in the description. Now, if we save this on its own, it will return raw text. But we want the text to be wrapped in HTML paragraph elements. So what we can do is wrap this function within another function named WP AutoP. So be sure to add the closing extra parentheses right here. Let's save this and check it out in the browser. There's Kitty Doe's wonderful biography. Next, let's work on outputting a list of other posts by this author. So back in our PHP file, underneath the biography description, let's create a brand new div. Let's give it a class of other posts by. And within this new div, let's create a heading level 4 that reads other posts. And then let's drop into PHP so we can dynamically output the name of the author. So let's echo out the results of get the author meta, and we want their nickname. So let's save that, and in the browser, that gives us other posts by Kitty Doe. All right, and then back in our PHP, underneath this heading level 4, let's create an unordered list, and then we will simply have a list item and a link for each post. But we don't want to hard code links to other posts. We want this to be dynamic. So we are going to use the WordPress loop. But before we can loop through anything useful, we first need to create a custom query of the posts that we are interested in. After that, then we can loop through the collection of posts to output a list item and a link. So right above this about author text div, let's create a new space and drop into PHP. And let's create a new variable named other author posts. We could have named this anything we like. I just made this up. But what we are going to do is populate this variable with only the posts that we are interested in. So only other posts from the same author. So let's set this variable to equal a new instance of the WP query class. Within these parentheses, let's create an array. And then within these parentheses, let's drop down to a new line just to stay organized. And now we can build our own custom post query. So let's begin with the author property. We only want posts from the current author. So get the author meta, and we want the ID. Let's also say that there should only be 3 posts at the maximum. So let's set the posts per page property. Let's set it to 3. And that's all we need for the custom query at the moment. Let's be sure to add a semicolon after these closing parentheses. And now, within our unordered list, we can simply loop through the results of our custom query. So below this opening unordered list line, let's drop into PHP. And let's use a while loop. So while, and let's say while our custom query of posts. So remember the variable name was other author posts. Let's say while that collection still has posts to loop through. So this method of have posts will evaluate to true if there are still more posts to loop through. So while this is the case, while there are still posts to loop through, we'll open up a pair of curly brackets. And within here, we'll do something once for each post. The first thing we want to do is get the data for that particular post ready to be used. So to do that, we can begin with our variable, other author posts, and it has a method named the post, which will get the relevant data ready. So at this point, we are ready to drop out of PHP and begin outputting dynamic HTML. So at the end of this line, let's drop out of PHP. And then on this line where we end the curly bracket, we can drop back into PHP. And then let's cut and paste our list item line so that it sits in between these two lines. So let's paste it in. And now we just need to output the permalink and the post title. So within the href attribute, let's drop into PHP. And we can use the permalink function to give us the URL. And then within the A tag, we just want to output the title of each post. So drop into PHP again, and we can use the title function. Let's save this and check it out in the browser. Looks good. But notice we are currently viewing the eating grass is nice post, so it doesn't really make sense to include that post in the other posts list. So to fix that, all we need to do is jump into our PHP, and up here when we are creating that custom query, let's just add on another property named post __ not _in, and this will let us exclude certain post IDs from the results of this search query. So this property is expecting an array of post IDs, and we just need to post it the ID of the current post. So to do that, we can use a function named getTheID. So let's save this and refresh the page. Perfect. So because we are currently viewing the eating grass is nice post, it doesn't show up in the other post list. So the Kitty Doe author only has 2 total posts, but what if an author only had 1 total post? In that case, we wouldn't want to display this other posts section at all. So to account for that possibility, we can wrap this entire div within an if statement. So back in our PHP, here is where the other posts by div begins. So right above that, let's drop into PHP, and let's say only if our other author posts variable, only if that custom query actually has posts. So we can use a method, have posts. So only if this evaluates to true do we want to display any of this content. So to begin the body of the if statement, let's open up a curly bracket here, and then let's find the closing div tag for this div. So let's scroll down a bit. Here it is. So right below that, let's drop into PHP and close out the if bracket, and then drop back out of PHP. Also, once we're done using our custom query, it's a good practice to reset the WordPress post data back to the natural state that it was in before our custom query overrode it. So remember that typically WordPress decides which data to query based on the current URL, not our own custom query. So to reset the post data back to normal, after this closing curly bracket, while we are still in PHP, we can simply run a function named wp reset post data. So things are working well for Kitty Doe because she only has 2 total posts. But if we visit a post by a different author, so this post, for example, this is by a different author who has more than 3 total posts. So in this case, it would probably be helpful to include a button or link here that reads view all posts by this author. So let's set that up. Let's jump back into our PHP. Let's scroll down a bit. Let's drop down to a new line. Let's create a link element. To fill out the href URL, we will want to drop into PHP. And let's echo out the results of get author posts URL. And we simply pass this function a user ID, and it will return a URL to the full author archives link. So to get the current author's ID number, we can use the get the author meta function, and we're looking for the ID. All right, and we want the actual text of this link that users click on to read view all posts by, and then we'll output the user's name. So drop into PHP, and then just echo out get the author meta, and we want their nickname. And while we're at it, why don't we give this link element a class so it looks like a button? We can reuse CSS that we once wrote for our homepage buttons. So let's give it a class of button A, and let's see how this looks in the browser. Perfect. So view all posts by Brad, and if we click it, it takes us to an author archive screen. But if we go back to one of Kitty Doe's posts, you'll notice that it doesn't make sense to include this full author archives link for authors that don't have more than 3 other posts to display. So with that in mind, let's jump back into our PHP and let's wrap this link within an if statement. So let's drop into PHP right above it. And let's say only if the current author has more than 3 posts do we want to display this. So we can use a function named count user posts, and we just feed this function the ID of the current author. So get the author meta, and we want the ID. So only if that value is greater than 3 do we want to display this link. So then we just open up a curly bracket, we close out PHP here, and then right after this link, let's drop into PHP, close out the if statement curly bracket, and then drop out of PHP. So if we save this and check out the browser, perfect. Kitty Doe no longer needs that button, but if we go to a different author, the button displays perfectly. And that's it. Our About the Author box is complete. I won't bore you with the CSS that makes the Other Posts section look a bit nicer. If you're interested in the CSS I used for that, you can always download the zip file with the source code of our finished product. That link's in the description. And that's going to bring this lesson to a close. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you feel like you learned something. And in our next lesson, we'll take a quick break from WordPress and take a look at a few raw JavaScript without jQuery techniques, and also a few relatively modern CSS layout tricks. So take care, and I will see you in another new video next Tuesday. If you haven't already, be sure to check out my brand new Get a Web Developer Job, Mastering the